The story follows Jesse and Gerald Burlingame, a middle-aged couple who plan a quiet weekend getaway at a secluded lakeside home. While Jesse organizes her clothes, Gerald slips a pair of handcuffs into his bag without telling her. Once everything is ready, they set out on their drive. Jesse admires the peaceful scenery outside, but Gerald tries to initiate intimacy by touching her leg. Jesse gently pushes his hand away, not feeling the same mood. Gerald reassures her, saying the trip will help them reconnect. On the way, they spot a stray dog gnawing at something lifeless by the roadside. Gerald slows the car, honks at the dog, and mutters complaints about strays. Jesse notices the animal has a collar, suggesting it might belong to someone. When they reach the house, Jesse goes inside to look around. She discovers the fridge already stocked with groceries and pulls out some meat, thinking about offering it to the dog they saw. Meanwhile, Gerald locks himself in the bathroom and secretly swallows a blue pill. Jesse heads outside with the food, but Gerald calls her back, scaring the dog off. He laughs and insists the meat is too expensive to waste on a stray. They chuckle briefly, then go inside to settle in. Later that night, Jesse puts on a silky nightgown, hoping to rekindle some romance. When he returns, he reveals the handcuffs. Jesse is uneasy but reluctantly agrees, allowing him to secure her wrists to the bed frame. Gerald swallows another pill and approaches her with a determined look. Jesse quickly realizes she doesn't like where things are going and tells him to stop. Gerald ignores her discomfort, continuing to push his fantasy. Jesse raises her voice and demands he stop, but Gerald grows frustrated, accusing her of ruining the trip. He tries to justify himself by saying they need to spice things up, but Jesse refuses to go along with something that frightens her. She asks him to release her, but Gerald doesn't listen and steps back, leaving her restrained. Jesse then admits that their marriage has been falling apart, hoping honesty will change his mind. Suddenly, Gerald's face twisted in pain and he collapsed onto Jesse. Shocked, she asked if he was okay, but there was no reply. Gerald had suffered a sudden heart attack, and within moments, he lay motionless on top of her. At first, Jesse thought it was some cruel prank, but as he remained still, panic rose inside her. With a final shove, he tumbled to the floor, striking his head and leaving a streak of blood. Jesse screamed for help, but the isolated house offered no response. The evening shadows deepened, making her feel utterly trapped and helpless. She fought desperately to find a way out, but every attempt failed. Then, faint sounds of movement came from outside the room. Hoping it was a passerby, she called out, but instead, the stray dog they had seen earlier crept in. The animal sniffed Gerald's body and, driven by hunger, began tearing into his flesh. Jesse cried out in horror, begging it to stop, but the dog continued gnawing at his arm. In the midst of her terror, she suddenly saw Gerald standing up, alive and speaking to her. Relieved, she pleaded for him to free her, but this version of Gerald only looked at his mangled arm and scolded her for trying to feed the dog earlier. Jessie froze when she realized his real body was still sprawled lifeless on the floor. The Gerald she was seeing was nothing more than a figment of her imagination. Disturbed, she watched as this phantom Gerald paced the room, berating her for letting things slip away and urging her to focus on survival, since no one else would rescue her. Driven by desperation, Jessie yanked at the cuffs until her wrist burned. For a moment, she imagined breaking free and standing tall, only to jolt back into reality and see she was still chained to the bed. Exhausted, she realized her mind was conjuring illusions of both Gerald and herself, guiding her to endure. The night grew darker as the stray dog returned again and again, consuming more of Gerald's remains. Later, Jessie stirred at the sound of footsteps echoing through the house. Fear seized her, convinced some ghostly presence had entered. To steady her nerves, she spoke to the hallucinated Gerald, who stood calmly by her side. As their conversation blurred into her thoughts, she drifted into a vivid dream of her childhood. She saw herself as a little girl by a quiet lake, overhearing her parents' heated argument about her behavior, while she sat silently, listening from a distance. Later, Jessie remembered sitting with her father on a bench, watching a solar eclipse. While she gazed at the darkened sky in wonder, he asked her to sit on his lap. In that moment, she suddenly realized he was taking advantage of her trust. The experience left her deeply shaken, planting a wound in her heart that never healed. Back in the present, the phantom Gerald appeared and asked why she had never shared what happened that day by the lake. Jessie admitted she had always been afraid of her secrets and the weight they carried. Gerald replied that the stray dog had disappeared because it sensed something darker nearby. Jessie dismissed the thought, believing it was another illusion, and shut her eyes, lost in painful childhood memories. She recalled how, the following day, her father had come to her quietly. He asked her to sit beside him and spoke as if nothing unusual had happened, while also hinting that telling others would tear their family apart. Young Jessie, frightened and confused, promised to remain silent. From that moment, she buried the memory deep inside and never spoke of it again. Suddenly, Jessie jolted awake with sharp pain in her leg. The stray dog was biting her. She kicked it away, and the creature returned to gnawing on Gerald's body. Soon, Gerald's apparition stood before her once more, speaking about life, death, and how quickly her time was slipping away. His words made her chest tighten, and she gasped for breath. Overwhelmed with panic, her mind then drifted again to another memory at the lake house. She saw her younger self lying on a bed, shackled, mirroring her current state. Jessie approached the girl and gently apologized, recognizing the burden she had carried since childhood. She recalled a tense moment at the dining table when she, still reeling from her trauma, accidentally shattered a glass. Startled, her father quickly pulled her into the bathroom, softly warning her to be more careful, while his eyes carried an unspoken threat. Snapping out of the memory, Jessie suddenly thought of a dangerous plan. She spotted a glass on the shelf above her bed, and her imagined self urged her forward, reminding her it would be painful. The hallucinated Gerald added that only blood would help her hands slip through the metal. Knowing she had no alternative, Jessie braced herself. Her inner self whispered to breathe steadily and focus on each step. She stretched as far as she could, managed to grab the glass, and after counting to 3, smashed it against the bed frame. Picking up a jagged shard, she pressed it against her wrist and began cutting. The pain was unbearable, yet she persisted, slicing deeper until her hand started to slide through the cuff, tearing her skin open. At last, she yanked her arm free, though it was raw and bleeding badly. Wasting no time, she turned her attention to freeing her other hand. Jessie then reached for her phone, only to discover the battery was completely dead. Refusing to surrender, she stretched painfully with her wounded hand and managed to snag the car keys from the shelf. With trembling fingers, she couldn't grip them properly, so she clenched the key between her teeth and used it to unfasten the second cuff. After a long struggle, she finally freed herself. Weak but determined, Jessie staggered into the bathroom, rinsed her wounds, and drank greedily from the tap. She found a roll of bandages and wrapped her injured wrist tightly. Overcome with fatigue, she collapsed onto the bed and drifted into a restless sleep. When she awoke, the stray dog was gnawing at her hand. Furious, she shoved it away and watched as it slunk back to Gerald's body. For the first time, she truly saw the terrible state of his remains, and nausea hit her hard. As she tried to look away, the dog suddenly pricked its ears and darted toward another room. Jessie froze. Someone else was inside the house. Heart pounding, she stepped toward the doorway and gasped at the sight of a tall man standing silently in the shadows. He looked eerily like the figure from her nightmares, the one she thought had been haunting her imagination. Terrified, Jessie instinctively removed her wedding ring and held it out. The towering man silently accepted the ring. Seizing the moment, she fled the house, climbed into the car, and sped down the dark road. Her injured hand throbbed with searing pain, and in her daze she thought she saw Gerald by the roadside, lifting his hand in farewell. The vision made her lose focus, and the car veered off, crashing violently into a tree. The noise drew attention, and lights flickered on in the nearby houses. Jessie, barely conscious, slammed her palm on the horn, desperate for help. A beam of light cut through the darkness as someone approached with a flashlight, and for the first time, Jessie felt a flicker of hope. The story then shifts to Jessie back at her office desk, recovering slowly from the ordeal. Her hand was still wrapped in bandages. Doctors confirmed that Gerald had died of a sudden heart attack, and Jessie received his insurance settlement. Outwardly, life had returned to normal, yet every night she lay awake, haunted by the unanswered mystery. What really happened to her wedding ring? Did she give it away to a stranger of flesh and blood, or something far less human? Even investigators and journalists offered no explanation, leaving Jessie to live with questions she might never resolve. With the money she received, she often returned to the old lake house from her childhood, searching for healing. 6 months after her escape, Jessie came across a newspaper article about a man named Raymond Joubert. He was described as a disturbed criminal who collected jewelry from corpses and mutilated them in horrifying ways. Jessie read that Joubert suffered from a rare disorder, acromegaly, which caused his features and limbs to grow unusually large. Authorities discovered his home filled with gruesome evidence. Inside, they found the remains of his own sister and her husband, whom he disturbingly referred to as his, quote, parents. He had slaughtered them, preserved their bodies in over 50 containers. Jessie's blood ran cold when she realized the shadowy figure she thought was a ghost during her ordeal was actually Raymond Joubert himself. He had been inside that house with her. Jessie resolved to confront her fears directly. She attended Joubert's trial, where it was revealed he hadn't spoken a single word since his arrest. But when Jessie entered the courtroom and locked eyes with him, his expression changed. Staring at her, he muttered, "You aren't real." Their gazes clashed, and Jessie felt as if fragments of both her father and Gerald echoed inside this monstrous man. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward calmly and told him, "You're so much smaller than I remember." Then, without hesitation, she turned, walked out of the courthouse with her head held high, and slipped on her sunglasses, feeling free, powerful, and ready to live the rest of her life on her own terms. At last, Jessie had broken free, not just from the cuffs, but from the chains of her past.